you need to remind yourself that inflation at between 2 and 3% is actually good.
Why is it good?
Why is it good? Because it means that there is growth in the economy, there's growth in wages, there's growth in purchasing power, there is growth in the overall output that the country is making.
Welcome to the Get Rich Slow Club podcast. I've got Evan Lucas here, and if you are tuning into this episode, make sure to go back and listen to our first episode where we talk about how the economy actually works. In this episode, we're going to be talking about inflation, interest rates, and central banks. Evan, thanks for being here.
With the pause of like,
yeah. I mean, it's going to be a great conversation because anyone who has talked about these, as we all have, there's always value in having a deeper understanding of how these are interlinked with one another and what you should be aware of as just an everyday Aussie. Mm-hmm. So what is inflation? Let's just start there.
Inflation obviously is the increase of purchasing coin. Another way to play it is inflation is the rate at which money loses purchasing power. So what I mean by purchasing power, when you go to buy something, you have the power in the money that you hold in your hand, credit card these days, let's be honest, at the same time it was this time last year. So that's the often way of putting it. In other words, what I mean is that inflation is the fact that your money from a year ago is going to be X amount less than it was a year beforehand. So 2% inflation means that actually your dollar today is going to be 98 cents this time last year because you've actually lost purchasing power. You've lost the ability to do it. Now, that's a really weird thing to say, but what inflation is a measure of is that loss of purchasing power. So you can't go out and buy a dollar lolly this time next year for the dollar it is today because you'd need $1.02 to do it. That's the way to explain it to you because the rate of money or the cost of money is going to increase. Now, the immediate question that comes about, well, why? How? Blah, blah, blah. So
why, how, and can we stop it? Why do we need it?
Why do we need it?
Why do we need inflation?
All of that kind of idea is you need to remind yourself that inflation at between 2 and 3% is actually good.
Why is it good?
Why is it good? Because it means that there is growth in the economy, there's growth in wages, there's growth in purchasing power, there is growth in the overall output that the country is making. So that goes broad, broad, broad. So if you work for a year and in 12 months' time, you go and actually speak to your boss and say, look, I've worked X for this year. Next year, I think that, I've obviously shown that I've improved the company, I've grown the company, therefore I should get a pay rise. That's inflation because that's wage inflation.
Right.
Therefore, you've got more money in your pocket, your ability to spend is higher, and you do that.
So if you don't get a wage increase, your
real wages go backwards. It's the same. So that question's perfect because it's the same argument, which is that if your wages stay the same, that technically you're what's referred to as real wage growth, which is your current wage minus inflation, that's your real wage.
Yeah.
So
I've lost money. Like year after year, I've lost money because I didn't get a raise.
Yeah. So you hear that a lot right now that, the government in Canberra has promised that we'll get real wages going again. Now, what the hell is that? That is that people's wages will grow above inflation. We haven't got that. I want to point that out. Now, there is so many other parts to this, and I'm going to try and do this as simply as I can because why don't we have real wage growth? Last episode, we spoke about supply and demand, what supply and demand is. At the moment, the reason we don't have real wage growth is that the output of companies and firms, whether it's a service, law, medical, engineering, take your pick, manufacturing, blah, 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 is still not more than the demand for the products that's there. And that therefore means that we can't actually get the growth that we need. We can't actually keep up with the changes that were going on. So real wages are going backwards because companies aren't actually
making as much money.
And making as much money, but the price is still going up. And that's the catch, right?
So, that's the hard part, right? Because you see the grocery prices, right? Like I remember how much I can buy for $100 and fill my trolley. And now it's like 3 items. And I'm like, are you kidding me? That part is inflation. The job side is the other side. But to your point, if businesses aren't making money, they're not able to pay you more. But then why are all the food prices going up? Why is everything else going up?
the inputs of them.
Right.
So the supply and demand of oil, right? Let's go back to what we did in the first episode and apply that. The cost of oil has been, now when we record this, it is back to what it was almost pre the conflict, but it was higher. So therefore that input cost is not because of, anything that farmers could do. They're just having to wear that cost, right? So their inflation of their costs has gone up for their manufacturing of their product, being agricultural products. Well, I'm going to have to hand that on because, I've now X plus the increase in oil prices means that I've got to have X plus the oil prices in the price of the goods that I sell. I'm not making any more money, right? Because I'm still at X.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? I've just had to increase my cost because something else has cost me
Right.
more. I'm not producing more. I'm not outputting more. It's none of that. It's just that I have to wear a cost and therefore so do you.
So inflation can move in a couple different ways, obviously, and some inflation is considered healthy. How does the RBA kind of fit into that? Because they calculate inflation.
Yes, they do.
They control it to a certain degree.
They try to.
Yeah. So how does that work?
So let's go back a little bit further then in terms of what inflation is doing and where the RBA sits inside of that. So as I said, there's a healthy inflation rate, which is that it's growing about 2%. That means that the growth of the economy is pretty reasonable. Wages are probably moving with it. Everything's sort of in that equilibrium point. There's both directions. There's inflation. We'll talk about hyperinflation, but then there's also deflation, which is where prices are actually going backwards. That's actually worse. We'll get to that in a minute. But inflation in terms of what the RBA is trying to do right now is you keep hearing this idea from the RBA and they do use words that you just sit there and go, who the hell ever speaks like that? But anyway, where the demand from the domestic user is outstripping supply. Now,
So what does that mean in simple terms?
So what does that mean? It means that the amount of domestic product that we're producing and services, Australians are still consuming it above trend and we're pushing prices higher.
So we should be using it less?
Yeah. So despite what we're saying, this is whole thing we spoke about in the first episode, despite what we're saying about the fact that we're feeling the cost of living crisis, we're feeling pressure about what we can buy at the supermarket, actually there is still a reasonable amount of us that are buying and putting demand into the economy that's above what we're actually outputting. So think about how many people are still happy to go on an overseas holiday. There is a very strong group of people saying they can't, but if you actually have a look, things like hotels, cafes, restaurants, things like what we call the experience economy, still growing about 5% per annum.
I had this conversation on the weekend. We went to Time Zone with the kids and we looked around and we said,
there's still a lot of people here.
There's so many people here, right? Like people have disposable income to go to Time Zone and lose your money on candy machines and video games. But then the flip side, my partner was like, yeah, but if that gets pushed up, that's the first thing to go.
So you said the word I was going to use, disposable income.
Yes.
So that is what's the other part of this, is that despite everything we spoke about, real wages possibly going backwards for a lot of people, people's disposable income is still actually above where the equilibrium point would be between slowing people down and people accelerating.
But is this because there's also a difference between people who are lower income, mid-income, high income, or rich if we're talking about different classes?
All of the above. And
because
so, again,
how do you measure something for someone who's low income, low socioeconomic status versus someone who's high? Like surely someone who has high income, often people will refer to boomers, for example, having money that they're sitting on that they can spend. How does that affect someone versus a young family that can barely get into the housing market?
Yeah, so this will be the question for the episode. Like that question, that whole point is the question for the episode.
All right, answer my question for this episode.
And this is the catch, is that the answer you said, or the question you said to me before about the RBA, which is, how does the RBA control this? Well, it's what I refer to it as doing fine art with a sledgehammer. And so it has one lever. The only lever it has is to hit every single individual company, firm the same, which is to increase or decrease interest rates. So the ability to borrow money, the rate at which you borrow money to expand your business or to buy a home or to do what you want to do, might be a personal loan and go overseas, something, not advice, but something you should probably think about, whether or not that's a good idea or not.
Not the best.
The way they do that is that if we increase the cost of money, the disposable income will get drained by that, right? So more and more people have to spend 6% mortgage rates rather than 4% mortgage rates. That additional 2% to pay the gap should drain out the disposable income that people have.
But is that actually accurate?
The caveat...
It depends on what group.
Yeah. So again, you're talking about cleaving in time, right? At this point in time in 2026, that's what we're doing. We're trying to raise rates to therefore decrease the amount of disposable income, to slow inflation, slow disposable income, blah, blah, blah. But as you point out, their time is not just an instant in time. It's a continuum. So, the reason boomers get, fingered at the moment is because they've been in the housing market and the asset market. Let's not just use property, but the asset market for probably as long as 50 years. They've had time to pay off their debts. They've had time to accumulate wealth. So their disposable income is going to be A, higher, but B, the lever that the RBA is trying to pull
doesn't affect them.
Not
at all. In fact, it might benefit them if they have money in a savings account or term deposit. Yeah.
Correct. So this is why I call it a sledgehammer doing fine art, because it is an indiscriminate tool. It is going to hit somebody with much, much more debt than somebody with no debt at all. So the young family or the person that can't get into the housing market that doesn't have disposable income has to borrow, all of a sudden has less disposable income, even more so because they're trying to service a debt, versus somebody that has asset backing with no debt. They're not touched by it at all. So the argument, therefore, immediately you can hear people yelling through their earphones. Well, why is interest rates the only option? Why is it the only tool that we have?
I've asked you that so many times.
You've asked me that question so many times. And I remember I've actually asked Michelle Bullock that question herself, who is the RBA governor. And their response is, it's the best mechanism we have.
Well, what other mechanisms do they have? Policy.
So policy. So this is the thing. That's monetary policy is central banker policy. The other policy is what we refer to as fiscal policy, and that's government. Now, the thing about government is that government is determined by you and me voting for them, and therefore vested interests get in the way. And when you have vested interests getting in the way, governments make decisions on fiscal policy that alleviates pressure, shall we say, but it also allows votes. So at the moment, there's an argument that we've got a supply of money in the system that's still allowing inflation too high. Too many people have disposable income. There is a lot of government spending that some people would argue is too
much
generous, particularly to middle and high income families. One that I heard the other day, which I think we're going a little bit off topic, but we need to say, is the way that we deal with childcare. Right? So childcare for upper middle class families, should that be given? Should you be giving a family earning $500,000 a childcare subsidy? Probably not.
Because it's around $500K or something.
It's $526,000 is the cutoff now for disposable income or for gross income of a couple to send their kids to childcare. But there's a flip side to that as well, is that the reason you want that family to keep going is that they're two high net worth individuals providing a reasonable amount of personal income tax to the government. This is the circle we discussed the last episode. The pros and cons, the give and take. This is fiscal policy.
Because if they're working, they're paying tax. If they're paying tax, more money for the government.
More government. The government can therefore fund the more services that they want to do.
For sure.
They're also therefore meaning that if they've got more people working, they have more disposable income to therefore consume, to actually make sure that the local cafe stays open.
Which is why you want them to send their kids to childcare. So
the circle give and take. So that's why it's so hard to answer that question from a point of view that it's not black and white, and it never will be in an economy. It's never that simple. The caveat is, do you want short-term pain and therefore getting back on track faster, or do you want it to be a slow burn? Now, Australia has chosen the latter because there's an argument that we didn't raise rates fast enough after COVID, that we could have taken, because during COVID, disposable income came from the government, right? It came from the government. Because we had this mass unemployment because people were basically furloughed and told to basically go home. Please don't catch COVID because we don't know what's going to happen. Oh, by the way, just so you can do that, we're going to support you with a government payment. It turned out that government payment was really, really, really generous. interest rates went to next to zero because the RBA's response was, we're going to make sure that it's very easy for you to service your mortgage or to borrow money to keep the economy going. Now, in hindsight, there's an argument those two decisions were wrong.
Yeah.
Because
but hindsight 2020, you don't know in that situation, right?
Excuse the pun, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because what you were talking about in the first episode, that data comes in a good 6 months late. So how do you make decisions based on that? It seems almost impossible.
Yeah. And so this is where economics is sometimes referred to as a social science, or is it a hard physical science?
It's neither.
It's neither.
Both.
It's both.
Yeah.
That's exactly how I would have answered as well, which is what you just said. It's neither or it's both, in the fact that it's technically a social science because it is measuring social interaction, social action, etc. But it is a physical science in the fact that it has numbers and maths behind it. There is clear evidence about what you can and can't do. The other part of this probably comes back to your question around inflation and what the RBA is trying to do and what the government's trying to do. I always argue it's almost the third law of Newton's physics, which is that for every taxable action, there's an equal but opposite taxpayer reaction in terms of how this is. So if you were to take away the government subsidy for that higher couple with childcare, what would they do? And
they might take time out of the workforce to raise their kids.
Because they can't afford to do it. Again, there's a social question to that. Why should, particularly now that we've started to, thankfully, it's not perfect, but at least we're starting to move up the gender equilibrium point of view. Does it force the mother out of the workforce again, or does it force
very likely, probably?
Probably,
yeah.
Right. Speaking personally, I don't want that. I want to have a dual income family. I want my children to, and that's again, you can then extrapolate that out to the bigger, broader group. Do they also therefore walk away from childcare and go to other options? Right. So the other options are more expensive education. So if you look at early learning centres, right, there's an argument becoming very clearly that those upper echelon people will find it cheaper to send them to early learning centres than childcare. Now that's a travesty, but this is the whole meeting point of if inflation of the price of childcare is so expensive, people are going to look for other options. Let's go to an even bigger one, getting back to my thing about, for every taxable action, there's equal opposite reaction. Look at fiscal policy around tobacco.
Yeah.
We use this as a great example all the time. The whole concept around the tobacco excise, when it was first put in place about 15, 20 years ago, wasn't really a tax policy to actually get revenue for the government. It was about actually
the social good of society, of not having people smoke.
Correct, but also to take pressure off the health system.
Right.
Right. So the cost of the health system was moving at such a rate that you could link it back to, obesity, smoking, the cause and effect of issues that leads to, kidney, heart, lung cancers, blah, 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 right? So how do we actually move the dial for the health policy off and the health, situation? Well, let's put a tax on one of the biggest causes of this, which is tobacco, which makes complete sense when you say it like that. The thing is, it's now become so expensive and we've put such a hyperinflation into tobacco that we've created a taxpayer reaction. And that taxpayer reaction is organised crime.
Yes. Right? I literally was having this conversation because there's
$13.
Yeah.
Versus $70.
Yeah. It's wild because there's an index that follows beer and cigarettes around the world, and Australia is the most expensive in the world due to the taxing on tobacco.
But the other way to look at it is that it makes sense when you say this. If you are going to get 20 years behind bars for Class A drug importation versus a slap on the wrist, possibly a $5,000 fine, maybe a year or two in jail for illegal tobacco, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Right? So when you hear it, like it's so simple in hindsight to point this out, but this is where we sit. Not only that, we've now lost $8 billion
in tax revenue.
Because people have switched their behavior from buying legitimate, actually regulated cigarettes to unregulated, illegal, imported cigarettes.
It's like that saying, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome.
That's the
that's exactly it. And that's policy change. That's
economics 101.
Economics,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's exactly right. Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome.
Yeah.
So this also gets back to your question before about where fiscal policy sits in it. Should you be looking at personal income, right? So part of the other question about disposable income is that, and why maybe the economy is not growing like it should be, is that the value and worth of your job is changing, because the further and further you up the chain you go, the more and more money you get paid, but the more and more money you pay in tax.
Yeah.
So the tax brackets don't change in this country. So
Which is crazy that people don't realize that that is like the biggest disappointment for every single person who's working. The fact that it doesn't keep up with inflation, doesn't keep up with wages, doesn't keep up with anything. So every year you're losing out on money that should technically be yours.
should technically be yours.
Yeah.
But again, the government would argue that you need the services and the output that it gives. So if you're making more money but paying more tax, there's an argument that actually helps because disposable income slows down in a high inflation environment. However, it also is a disincentive to work.
Yeah.
So like the tobacco example, what's the drive to make and improve productivity and therefore enhance what you have and therefore enhance the output you have if the work that you're doing actually, ends up being uncompetitive because of all this tax you're paying? So this is all the levers. This is, again, as I keep coming back to from the first episode, and I'll say it in this one, and I'll say it in the next two, the circle, which is show me the incentive and show me the outcome. That's what, if I'm going to work hard, I'm going to get taxed more than I expected.
So should I work hard?
Bingo. So the big problem governments, in particularly the West at the moment, have is in the education system around that concept. So if you go back to pretty much the start of the GFC, the contract, the social contract, was that if you got yourself an education, you were more likely than not to have about a 50% upside on your peer that didn't go to tertiary education. Now that figure's about 33%.
Is it that low?
It's that low.
Wow.
Not only that, from 2008 to now versus pretty much the early 90s to 2008, the rapid inflation increase in tertiary education is astonishing.
Yeah.
So the average sort of millennial or zennial, let's call them that, was paying a student loan, HEX or wherever you are, you're listening to this around the world, of between $40,000 and $100,000, give or take. Now it's more likely to be 80 to as much as $250,000.
Wow.
In student lending. Then don't forget, most countries around the world have that linked to inflation, right, in terms of the interest rate that's on it. So higher level of debt, higher interest rate, lower return.
Yeah, I was going to say you don't even know if you're going to get that return.
Right, lower wage return. But if you do go in, you're going in more likely than not at six figures, which means you're already at 30%. Soon you get to $135,000 in this country, you go to 37% tax rate. They're all very big disincentives.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is bigger economic stuff coming to a head. We're sort of getting slightly off, but this is where the real world crashes in to where we are. Why, as we said in the first episode, talk to me about what GDP is. Well, if your investment into the firm you work for, this is private investment part of the GDP figure, doesn't make sense to you, you probably might stop working for them and go and do something else or just sort of hover at the current level. Therefore, your consumption is not going to increase either. So you're not putting upward pressure on consumption, GDP output. All of that is how you can link it all back. It's all about how it all interlinks with each other in random ways. But you can, it is, here's this thing, this is what's likely, this is how it's going to happen, this is the output. That's what I spend my life doing. That's why I get excited about it, why I can understand it frustrates the hell out of people. Because again, how do you fix that is the next question.
Yeah, and it seems impossible. Like, to me, it seems so complicated to even just find a way to fix it. Like you said, inflation. All right, cool. Central bank, the RBA is going to decide inflation rate or interest rates are going up, they're going down. And then what else? Policy. And
so this is where the next part of the question is, which is, let's go back to monetary policy and the sledgehammer that is. We know how fast it can change both positively and negatively. So let's look at what the RBA did in 2025 when it cut rates 3 times and how quickly people's disposable income came back to them and how quickly they changed their behavior and how fast they started spending again. So that's how quick it can change. The catch is why we are now back in a scenario where we've had the 3 rate cuts they gave us last year taken away from us with 3 rate rises in 2026 is because we're not improving business outcomes. We're not improving the amount of supply of goods. Inflation took off again. So how do we get better? Well, we have to get more productive. Now, let's use that term to finish off what we're talking about here. When you hear the word productivity, the initial reaction from most people is do more with less. Right? They hear the word productivity. I've got to work harder. I've got to do more. I'm not going to get paid anymore, but I need to do more with what I have in the minutes of hours I have for the 7.8 hours I'm supposed to work per day. That's not productivity. That's activity. That's what we refer to as activity. You're just actively doing stuff.
So what's productivity?
It's enhancing what you have.
Enhancing.
So by enhancing, I mean, let's use AI as a great example, that the computer in front of you can give you back 15 minutes of your time for the admin that you have to do for your job. Let's say you work in data analytics and the input of that data takes 15 to 20 minutes of your day per day to do that. That's an unproductive piece of time.
For the rest of the time, you mean?
For that 20 to 50, that's just input.
Yeah.
Right? You're not actually producing anything.
Yeah, right.
What if AI could take that off your hands and do that for you instantaneously? You now have 15 to 20 minutes more of your own time in that 7.8 hours of the day. And that extra time that you have could be to actually call a client to therefore make an extra sale, which means the supply of the service of the data analytics has increased. That's productivity. So you've enhanced what you have. The AI enhanced your output because it gave you your time back. So the greatest example of productivity enhancement is probably the internal combustion engine. So the Industrial Revolution went from having people and horses as the productive output to having a machine that could do it at 5, 10, 20 times faster and more efficient. So the productivity output was huge. So the great example that I try and use is if you look at the Australian census through the 1900s and the amounts of direct and indirect labour into agriculture, it was about as much as 35% of the entire population of the country.
Yeah, wild.
It's now in 2026, and we're about to have the census as we're recording this. It's as low as 7%.
Oh, wow.
Of the total population. What changed? Machinery.
Yeah.
That's productivity. Now, that is also why the behavioral link is I hear AI, I hear enhancement, I hear activity, I'm going to lose my job.
Yeah, because a lot of people think it's like productivity for the sake, growth for the sake of what? Like how much do you get a lot of time back? You're now producing way more. You're working way more. You're getting more done, but wage growth isn't really happening.
Yeah, so let's go back again though to the internal combustion engine and the Industrial Revolution and what happened. So yeah, we've gone from having 30 to 35% on the land to 5 to 7%. So therefore, there's a lot of unemployment there. Well, the unemployment rate's at 4.5%. Means people actually went and got retooled. They got educated. Yeah. They learnt different things. Mechanics needed to service those machineries. They were more likely than not to be the people that were working on the land that have gone.
It's just different jobs.
So it's different. So it's what we refer to as augmentation. So a data analyst role will probably lose that title, but not necessarily lose a job, because data analytics can be done by AI, but data thought process.
Yeah, you need to analyze it and present it and make decisions based on it.
Make decisions off it. And therefore, the decisions will lead to, well, if we do X, Y, Z, we can therefore increase the services that we do. That's productivity because all of a sudden there's more output. So this is the other caveat. Not trying to be optimistic and paint AI as the revolution of, blah, 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 but it's just the example of how to go, when you hear the word productivity, they are trying to say we need to, and then they'll turn around and say we need to increase our output. And the question you ask, how do you increase output? It's about getting more enhancing, or the word is efficient, but it's not the correct term. It's about using what we have better to allow us to make more. And that's what the internal combustion engine did. We are now probably about to see it in the 21st century age of what a revolution like that can do. And that's a positive thing. That does mean all of the questions we've asked in the first 2 episodes can possibly be answered, which is we can therefore have higher wages because people are actually having to think more and therefore producing more. More output means better outcomes for businesses. Better outcome for businesses means that there's more profit. More profit probably means that higher wages can happen and more distribution of wealth. Rightly or wrongly, people will disagree or agree with what I just said, but that's sort of where we're staring at the moment if you want the optimistic view of where inflation and where rates and where the whole economy currently sits.
So for anyone who's listening and they've just taken this all in and they're like, oh my gosh, inflation, interest rates, central banks, productivity, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. Is there just a simple thing that you think this is what you should maybe look at or focus on? Don't get overwhelmed, but this is actually important.
Yeah, history. So the straight answer is we know from history that in the future that rates will be lower. Like it may still be in the now that things could still get a little bit harder and tighter, but we know that time will heal all. Interest rates go up and go down. Inflation goes up and goes down. Now, again, we spoke about this in the first episode around, the fact that the central economist at the RBA talked about having higher unemployment could actually help. That horrible comment, she's right in the fact that if we have higher unemployment, demand will fall and will come back to a level that's much more, conducive for it. That means rates can start to cut again because they will want to accelerate the economy because inflation's back into a much, much more controllable, better position. Doesn't mean there's no pain to that. Yeah. So, will it get fixed? Yes, it will. How will it get fixed? Unknown. Will there be pain to it? Yep.
It's kind of what you said about the ship sailing as well, right? Yeah. I think you might go through a storm and it's going to be hard. So if inflation is really high, if you're having a hard time paying off your mortgage, it doesn't mean it's going to be forever. It might be a short period of time. It might be a long period of time. So buckle up, hold tight, but eventually we'll sail out of that storm and it'll be smooth sailing.
Again,
hopefully.
Let's use history.
Yeah.
It's 6 years since COVID.
Holy, has it been 6 years?
Right. So
Wild.
6 years since COVID, but at the time it felt like it would never end.
Yeah.
It's been, what are we talking about now? Almost 18 years since the GFC.
Yeah. Yep.
It's over 26 years since the Asian financial crisis and the .com. It's 30 plus years since the early 90s recessions. It's 7 years since the late 80s flash crashes. Time will heal all.
Yeah, it's important to have that perspective, right? The whole zoom out. Right now, it might feel hard and tough and challenging.
It's what you guys talk about all the time with Get Rich Slow, which is that, there's a slow burn to getting rich. It's a slow burn with the economics of it as well. It will improve. The question will be when. Well, again, I don't know. And we need to be honest about that. I do know that it will get better because all cycles come to an end. And it's not just in the last 30 years or the last 100 years or even since the Industrial Revolution, the last 200 years. You can go back millennium, right, and have a look at all these things. Booms and busts happened and have happened much more dramatically, might I add, than what we're even going through now.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the other thing you've got to remind yourself is that as dramatic as this feels, this isn't as bad as it's been. There has been some horrendous Great Depression.
For sure, yeah. No, I would rather be now than then. That's for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
All of its perspective.
Yeah. So zoom out when in doubt. Evan, thank you. Everyone, tune in because we'll be talking about property and housing in our next episode. Thanks.
Thanks so much for joining us. If you found this episode helpful, please rate us 5 stars, write a review, or share with a friend. If you're new to investing, make sure to listen to our first 10 episodes. Follow us at Get Rich Slow Club or Tash at Tash Invests or me at Anna Christina. The Get Rich Slow Club podcast is a collaboration between Tash Etchman from Tash Invests and Anna Christina from Perler. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to investing, so make sure to check out our financial services guide and read the product disclosure statements and target market determination for any investments you're considering. See our show notes for more info. Any advice is general and does not consider your financial situation, needs, or objectives, so consider whether it's appropriate for you. This show was brought to you by Natasha Etchman, who is a corporate authorized representative, number 1317713 of Rask Licensing Proprietary Limited, and Perler, who's an authorized representative 1281540 of Sanlam Private Wealth, AFSL 337927. The Get Rich Slow Club acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land we record on, from coast to coast across land, waters, and communities. We pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging.